Science has just validated something spiritual masters have always known. No real barriers exist in the universe. The 2025 Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to John Clark, Michael Debye, and John Martinez for experimentally proving that particles traverse solid walls without ever being inside them. That's right, the impossible happens every instant at the quantum level. But here's the twist that will shift your entire perspective on everything. This phenomenon doesn't just happen with microscopic particles. These scientists demonstrated that entire macroscopic systems composed of billions of particles also cross barriers as though they simply don't exist. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss upcoming videos where we explore how quantum physics validates spirituality. Because what we're about to reveal today will demolish the idea that you're separated from the universe or limited by external circumstances. Quantum physics just scientifically proved that we live in a field of infinite possibilities, where barriers are merely illusions of unawakened consciousness. Prepare yourself to understand why you are a quantum being living in a quantum universe. For centuries, spiritual teachings from all traditions have repeated the same fundamental truth. Everything is energy. Everything is vibration. Everything is interconnected. Eastern masters spoke about Maya, the illusion of solid matter. Mystics always knew that the barriers we perceive are constructions of the limited mind. Now, quantum physics not only confirms this, but experimentally demonstrates how it works. The phenomenon called quantum tunneling reveals that subatomic particles regularly traverse apparently impenetrable obstacles. An electron approaches an ultra-thin barrier, and instead of bouncing back like a ball against a wall, simply appears on the other side without ever having occupied the space between the 2 points. It disappears from one side and materializes on the other instantaneously. To the mind conditioned by classical Newtonian thinking, this seems absurd. We violate all our intuitions about how reality should function, but it turns out these intuitions were built observing only the macroscopic world, the apparent reality that our limited senses can capture. When we dive into the quantum realm, we discover that the rules change completely. And here's the crucial point connecting physics with spirituality. These quantum rules aren't bizarre exceptions of nature. They are the true nature of reality. The classical world we perceive is merely an approximation, a statistical average of quantum behaviors happening at unimaginable scales. Think about your own spiritual experience. How many times have you felt there should be a way to transcend limitations, to cross obstacles that seem insurmountable? Fear, anxiety, repetitive mental patterns, beliefs about what's possible or impossible in your life. These are the walls we mentally construct. Quantum physics suggests something revolutionary. Just as particles traverse physical barriers, consciousness can traverse mental and energetic barriers. We're not talking about poetic metaphor. We're talking about fundamental principles of the universe applied at all levels of reality. Physicists describe quantum particles not as solid objects with defined edges, but as wave functions. Imagine a wave spreading across the ocean. It doesn't have an exact point where it begins or ends. The wave function represents all possible positions where that particle can be found, with different probabilities for each location. Where the wave is tallest, the greater the probability of detecting the particle there. But the wave never completely reaches zero at the edges. There's always a small probability of finding that particle in unexpected places, even on the other side of a barrier. When this probability wave encounters an obstacle, part of it is reflected back, but part penetrates through, carrying with it the possibility that the particle manifests beyond the barrier. This means electrons traveling through a wire can jump over breaks, appearing on the other side as though the wire had never been interrupted. In fact, modern electronic components are so miniaturized that electrons jump between different circuits even when they shouldn't. Engineers constantly face this challenge in chip manufacturing. Quantum behavior invades the technological world we consider purely classical. But during most of the 20th century, scientists believe quantum effects remained confined exclusively to the microscopic realm. Electrons, photons, individual atoms demonstrated these strange behaviors. Larger objects always seemed to obey classical physics. There was this apparent division between two worlds, the quantum and the classical. Then in the 1980s, 3 researchers at the University of California, Berkeley decided to test whether this division really existed or was merely a limitation of our observational capacity. John Clark, Michael DeVey, and John Martinez set up a bold experiment to verify whether entire macroscopic systems could exhibit quantum tunneling. They worked with something called a Josephson junction, where 2 superconducting wires are separated by an ultra-thin insulating barrier. Under normal conditions, this barrier should completely block the passage of electrons according to classical physics. But these weren't normal wires under normal conditions. They were superconductors cooled to temperatures near absolute zero, some of the lowest temperatures achievable in the universe. Under these extreme conditions, something extraordinary happens to electrons. In conventional wires at room temperature, electrons repel each other because they're negatively charged. They also constantly collide with atoms in the material, losing momentum with each impact. These collisions generate electrical resistance, producing heat and dissipating energy. But when we cool certain materials to cryogenic temperatures, the physics changes radically. An electron traversing the material slightly distorts the lattice of metal ions around it, creating a small region with temporary positive charge. Another electron detects this positive region and is attracted to it, following behind the first electron's path. These 2 Cooper pairs form what we call Cooper pairs. Billions of these Cooper pairs move together through the superconductor without any resistance at all, described by a single collective wave function. Here's where the spiritual connection becomes impossible to ignore. These billions of particles are no longer behaving as separate individual entities. They've reached a state of perfect coherence, moving as a unified consciousness. It's exactly what spiritual traditions describe when speaking about transcending the individual ego and experiencing union with the whole. It's not coincidence. It's the universe revealing its fundamental nature at different levels of manifestation. When this collective wave function reaches the thin insulating barrier of the Josephson junction, it extends into the barrier and overlaps with the wave function on the other side. This overlap allows Cooper pairs to tunnel through the barrier, creating a continuous supercurrent without any voltage. This effect earned Brian Josephson the Nobel Prize in 1973 and gave the junctions their name. But the Berkeley team wanted to go further. They wanted to demonstrate that the entire wave function, representing billions of Cooper pairs, could tunnel through the barrier as a single macroscopic quantum object. This would be revolutionary because it would definitively prove that no real division exists between quantum world and classical world. Everything is quantum. It always has been. The appearance of separation is just that, appearance, Maya, perceptual illusion. To conduct this experiment, the team needed to measure the smallest possible changes in current and voltage crossing the junction. They used a dilution refrigerator to cool the system to only a few tens of millikelvin, temperatures colder than interstellar space. They surrounded the entire apparatus with layers of magnetic shielding and microwave filtering to eliminate any external interference. Then, they passed a precisely controlled current through the junction. With low currents, everything behaved exactly as superconductivity theory predicted. A stable supercurrent flowed without producing any voltage, with Cooper pairs tunneling through the barrier individually. But when they gradually increased the current, something extraordinary happened at a specific critical value. Suddenly, counterintuitively for superconducting systems, a voltage began to appear. This voltage spike meant that the collective quantum state had escaped its confinement and was tunneling through the junction as a single entity. The entire macroscopic wave function, representing an astronomical quantity of particles moving coherently, crossed the barrier. It wasn't individual particles jumping one at a time. It was the entire system manifesting on the other side of the barrier as though it didn't exist. Think about the spiritual depth of this discovery. Billions of particles reaching perfect coherence transcend physical limitations that should be absolute. When we achieve coherence, when we align our energy, when our consciousness reaches unified states through meditative practices or expanded states of perception, we access capabilities that transcend normal limitations of consensual reality. The voltage that emerges during this process reveals something crucial about the nature of macroscopic tunneling. As the wave function escapes, its relative overlap with the wave function on the other side changes continuously. This constant variation is what generates the voltage. This confirms that it's the entire macroscopic wave function that's moving, not just individual Cooper pairs crossing the junction separately. The signature of the phenomenon is in this dynamic voltage that appears only when the collective system makes the quantum transition. But how do we know definitively that this is genuine quantum tunneling and not some classical process? There are situations where classical physics can explain similar transitions. At higher temperatures, random thermal energy can push the wave function over the barrier through a process called thermal activation. In fact, at elevated temperatures, we observe strong correlation between temperature and the current necessary to produce the phenomenon. The hotter the system, the more thermal energy available to help surmount the barrier, reducing the necessary critical current. What unequivocally reveals the quantum nature of the process is the behavior at extremely low temperatures. As temperature progressively decreases, the escape rate stops showing any temperature dependence. This is the definitive signal. Classical thermal processes always depend on temperature because they rely on thermal energy to function. When temperature drops so low that thermal energy becomes essentially zero, classical processes stop completely. But quantum tunneling continues happening at exactly the same rate because it doesn't depend on temperature. It depends only on the fundamental quantum properties of the system. This temperature independence in extreme cryogenic regimes proves that the collective quantum system, representing billions of Cooper pairs, is tunneling through the barrier by purely quantum mechanisms. For the first time in history, scientists experimentally demonstrated that quantum properties of the universe operate at scales above individual particles. The macroscopic world, the world we perceive as solid and separate, is also fundamentally quantum. Now connect this with consciousness and spirituality directly. If macroscopic physical systems exhibit quantum behavior, why would the most complex system known in the universe, human consciousness, be an exception? Spiritual masters always taught that consciousness isn't confined to the physical brain. Near-death experiences, astral projection, remote viewing, profound intuition, meaningful synchronicities, all these phenomena suggest that consciousness operates beyond the spatial and temporal limitations we assume are absolute. Quantum physics offers a conceptual framework to understand how this can function. The wave function in quantum mechanics represents a field of possibilities. Before measurement, before observation, the particle exists in superposition of all possible states simultaneously. Only when we observe, when consciousness interacts with the system, does the wave function collapse into a specific result. This role of conscious observation in wave function collapse has been intensely debated since the early days of quantum mechanics. Some physicists argue that consciousness is fundamental to the process. Others propose alternative interpretations. But the fact remains, observation changes the quantum system in measurable and reproducible ways. Spiritual traditions always affirmed that consciousness creates reality, not just passively observes. Meditation, visualization, focused intention. All these practices operate on the principle that by directing consciousness in certain ways, we influence the manifestation of reality around us. Quantum physics validates this principle at the experimental level. The famous double-slit experiment demonstrates that electrons behave as waves or particles depending on whether they're being observed. The very nature of reality changes based on the act of conscious observation. Consider quantum tunneling as metaphor and operational principle simultaneously. Metaphorically, it represents transcending limitations that seem absolute. You face an apparently insurmountable obstacle in life. Illness, financial situation, destructive relationship, compulsive mental pattern. Conditioned consciousness sees these situations as solid walls. But if everything is fundamentally quantum, including you, then these barriers are probability constructions, not absolute fixed realities. By changing your state of consciousness, altering your personal wave function through spiritual practices, you can tunnel through these apparent limitations. As an operational principle, quantum tunneling suggests that when we reach states of internal coherence, when we align thought, emotion, intention, and action in unified direction, we access capabilities that transcend normal classical behavior. Remember the Cooper pairs. Individually, electrons collide with obstacles and dissipate energy. But when billions of them reach perfect coherence in superconductors, they traverse impossible barriers without losing any energy. Your consciousness operates on the same principle. Fragmented, scattered in internal conflicts, it encounters constant resistance. Unified, coherent, focused, it transcends normal limitations. The Berkeley scientists needed to cool their superconductors almost to absolute zero to observe macroscopic tunneling. Temperature represents thermal agitation, random chaotic movement of particles. At high temperatures, this chaos masks quantum effects. Only by eliminating these thermal perturbations, reducing the system to absolute silence, do pure quantum effects become observable. There's a profound spiritual analogy here. Meditative practices from all traditions emphasize quieting the mind, silencing the constant internal dialogue, calming emotional fluctuations. This internal silence isn't purposeless emptiness. It's creating the conditions where your fundamental quantum nature can express itself without interference from mental noise. When you meditate deeply, when you reach states of pure presence, when you experience consciousness expansion through contemplative practices or non-ordinary states, you're essentially cooling your mental emotional system, reducing the thermal noise of conditioned mind, allowing quantum aspects of consciousness to manifest. In this state of coherent silence, possibilities that seemed impossible become accessible. Insights emerge from nowhere. Synchronicities multiply. Apparent limitations dissolve. You're tunneling through mental and energetic barriers. The voltage measurement in the Berkeley experiment reveals continuous change in the overlap between wave functions when macroscopic tunneling occurs. This demonstrates that it's the entire collective system that's in transition, not individual components acting separately. Apply this to spiritual transformation. Real, profound change doesn't happen by adjusting superficial behaviors or isolated beliefs. It happens when your entire consciousness system undergoes phase transition, when you tunnel from one state of being to a completely different one. Spiritual awakening isn't a gradual, linear process. It's a sudden quantum transition to a new level of functioning. In 1935, Erwin Schrödinger proposed his famous cat-in-a-box paradox to demonstrate how absurd quantum theory seems when applied to the macroscopic world. A cat in a box with a quantum mechanism that may or may not release poison should, according to quantum mechanics, exist in superposition of alive and dead states simultaneously until someone opens the box and observes. Schrödinger intended this as criticism, showing that quantum theory leads to ridiculous conclusions in the real world. But now we know that Schrödinger was more correct than he imagined. The absurdity isn't in quantum theory. It's in our assumptions about the nature of macroscopic reality. Thanks to Clark, DeVay, and Martinez, we've experimentally demonstrated that macroscopic objects exhibit genuine quantum behavior. We can't yet put cats in superposition, but we've proven that systems composed of astronomical quantities of particles tunnel through barriers as unified quantum objects. The macroscopic world isn't an exception to quantum rules. It's a manifestation of them. Everything is quantum. It always has been. The division between classical and quantum is perceptual illusion, limitation of our capacity to observe quantum coherence in complex and hot systems. This discovery established foundations for superconducting qubits we use today in quantum computing. The same principles from the first Josephson junctions are applied to control quantum states in modern quantum processors. Quantum computers operate by maintaining qubits in superposition, allowing them to process multiple possibilities simultaneously. When scientists develop quantum technology, they're not creating something artificial that violates natural laws. They're finally aligning technology with the true quantum nature of the universe that always existed. But let's go beyond technology to deeper implications. If the universe is fundamentally quantum at all levels, then separation is illusory. In quantum mechanics, particles can become entangled, existing in correlated states no matter how distant they are from each other. Measuring one entangled particle instantaneously affects the other, even if they're on opposite sides of the galaxy. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance because it violated his intuition about locality. But experiments have repeatedly confirmed that quantum entanglement is real. If everything in the universe emerges from fundamental quantum fields, then everything is entangled at some level. You're not separated from the environment around you, from other people, from the entire cosmos. This interconnection isn't a beautiful spiritual metaphor. It's demonstrable physical reality. Mystical traditions always knew this through direct experience. Now quantum physics provides scientific validation. When you affect your own consciousness, when you elevate your vibration, when you cultivate love and compassion, you're not just changing your individual internal state. You're altering the shared quantum field that connects everything. Consider implications for manifestation and reality creation. If conscious observation collapses wave functions, if coherent consciousness can tunnel through limitations, if everything is quantum entangled, then focused intention directed from elevated consciousness state has real power to influence event manifestation. It's not magical thinking. It's application of fundamental quantum principles. Obviously, there are limitations and complex factors involved. You can't simply wish for something and expect instant manifestation, but you can work with probabilistic tendencies, tilting the quantum field of possibilities in specific directions through directed consciousness. Practices like visualization, decree, concentrated prayer, energy work, all operate at this level. You're interacting with the quantum field of possibilities, collapsing certain probabilities into manifestation while reducing others. The effectiveness of these practices depends on coherence, clarity of intention, emotional alignment, and persistence. Just as Cooper pairs need perfect coherence to exhibit macroscopic quantum properties, your consciousness needs internal coherence to manifest significant changes in physical reality. The discovery of macroscopic quantum tunneling receives celebration and visibility because it underpins so much of quantum mechanics and modern quantum computing. But there's a deeper dimension rarely discussed in scientific contexts. This discovery validated that the entire universe operates by quantum principles without exception. No division exists between quantum and classical, between spiritual and material, between consciousness and matter. Everything is manifestation of the same fundamental quantum field. Consider that this research took decades to prove and was motivated purely by curiosity and need to know, without necessarily understanding potential applications that could be unlocked. The researchers wanted to test theory against actual behavior of the universe until proving it one way or another. This is the true spirit of scientific investigation, aligned with spiritual seeking. Both are driven by profound desire to understand the nature of reality, transcend limitations of ordinary perception, and access more fundamental truths about existence. Science and spirituality aren't opposing domains. They're complementary approaches to the same fundamental investigation. Quantum physics is finally reaching insights that contemplative traditions accessed through direct experience millennia ago. When mystics speak about unified field, fertile void, universal consciousness, divine matrix, they're describing the same reality that physicists call quantum field, universal wave function, cosmic entanglement. Different languages, different methodologies, same fundamental truth. You are a quantum being living in a quantum universe. Your cells, molecules, atoms, subatomic particles, everything operates by quantum principles. Your consciousness, whether localized in the brain, extended beyond the body, or fundamental property of the universe, is also quantum. Limitations you accept as absolute are in many cases mental constructions based on classical Newtonian worldview that we already know is incorrect at fundamental level. When you transcend fear, when you dissolve limiting beliefs, when you expand beyond narrow egoic identity, when you experience expanded consciousness states, you're quantum tunneling through mental and energetic barriers. You're accessing your fundamental quantum nature. You're operating by the same principles that govern Cooper pairs tunneling through Josephson junctions. Internal coherence allows transcending apparent limitations. The practical implications for your spiritual life and personal development are profound. Stop seeing obstacles as fixed, immutable realities. Start seeing them as probability fields that can be influenced by changes in your consciousness. Cultivate coherence through meditative practices, emotional alignment, clarity of intention. Reduce mental thermal noise through inner silencing. and then direct your coherent consciousness to tunnel through apparent limitations toward the possibilities you seek to manifest. You have this power because you are fundamentally quantum. Science just validated what your spiritual heart always knew to be true. Quantum physics continues revealing increasingly profound secrets about the nature of reality and the role of consciousness in creating what we experience. The implications extend far beyond laboratory experiments. They touch the core of who we are and what we're capable of becoming. When ancient wisdom traditions spoke of enlightenment, they described states where individual consciousness merges with universal consciousness, where separation dissolves, where impossible becomes possible. Quantum mechanics provides a scientific framework that makes these descriptions less mystical and more mechanistic, not to diminish their profundity, but to show they're consistent with how the universe actually operates. The coherence achieved by Cooper pairs in superconductors offers a powerful model for spiritual practice. Just as cooling eliminates thermal chaos, allowing quantum properties to emerge, spiritual practices eliminate mental emotional chaos, allowing consciousness properties to emerge. Just as billions of particles moving in perfect synchrony can accomplish what individual particles cannot, human consciousness aligned in coherent intention can accomplish what scattered awareness cannot. This isn't mere analogy. These are expressions of the same fundamental principles operating at different scales. Understanding that macroscopic systems are quantum should fundamentally alter how we approach life challenges. The wall you're facing in your career, relationships, health, or personal growth isn't made of solid, impenetrable matter. It's made of probability distributions in quantum fields. Your consciousness, properly prepared and directed, can influence those probability distributions. Not through force, but through resonance. Not through struggle, but through alignment. Not through classical mechanisms, but through quantum principles. This is why practices emphasizing presence, coherence, and elevated emotional states are so effective. They're not just feel-good activities. They're technologies for optimizing your quantum nature. When you maintain states of gratitude, love, peace, or joy, you're not just experiencing pleasant emotions. You're achieving coherent quantum states that interact more effectively with the quantum field of possibilities surrounding you. You're becoming like those Cooper pairs, moving through reality with reduced resistance, capable of traversing barriers that would stop incoherent consciousness. The Nobel Prize awarded to Clark, DeVay, and Martinez recognizes decades of work proving something that revolutionizes our understanding of reality. But the real revolution happens when individuals integrate this knowledge into lived experience. When you stop identifying as a separate classical object buffeted by external forces and start recognizing yourself as a quantum process intimately connected with everything, your entire relationship with reality transforms. Limitations become provisional. Impossibilities become improbable, but not forbidden. The fixed gives way to fluid. The determined gives way to potential. This work deserves celebration not just for technological applications it enabled, but for philosophical and spiritual implications it carries. We live in a quantum universe. We are quantum beings. The boundaries we perceive between self and other, between possible and impossible, between material and spiritual. These boundaries are constructs of limited perception, not fundamental features of reality. As you deepen your understanding of quantum principles and their spiritual implications, you progressively dismantle these illusory boundaries. You begin operating from your true quantum nature. And from that place, transformation that seemed impossible becomes not just possible, but natural, the expected result of aligning with how reality actually works at its deepest level. Quantum physics continues revealing increasingly profound secrets about reality's nature and consciousness's role in creating what we experience. Upcoming videos will explore how to practically apply these quantum principles in your daily life to manifest the reality you desire to live. If you made it this far and understood that we are quantum beings operating in a quantum universe where limitations are illusory, write quantum in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now to continue this journey of integration between science and spirituality. The next video will appear on screen and take you even deeper into this transformative understanding. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.